And welcome back to the Sit Rep Podcast. I'm Marty, and I'm joined here by Conrad Weiser. Conrad is running up. Well, I'm going to let you tell you what you're running because it gets pretty wordy, and I'm going to tell you Asian naval battles are not my forte, although it's an amazing looking table so far. So, Conrad, please share with us what you got going on here.
Well, about 13 years ago, I was visiting Korea and found out about this admiral by the name of Yi Sun Shin, who defeated the Japanese pretty handily in a lot of battles. And the famous last battle that he was in was called the Battle of Noryang in 1598. And that's when they defeated the Japanese Navy, and he was shot and died on the bridge in the process, like what happened else. I'd never been able to find any miniatures or anything like that. That was something I was interested in, and finally after developing some skills, I was able to build my own ships, and I was able to use some Callisto 12mm figures.
So, are all the ships scratch built then?
Well, yes. I mean, I built the model, and then I cast them myself.
Good call. Yeah, okay, cast it. I'm like, that's a lot of boats.
Yes. Yep. And then the figures are Callisto 12mm line. But I found there were a couple of Osprey books that cover fighting ships of the Far East, 1 and 2, by Stephen Turnbull, and they kind of covered a lot of these battles. And so I came up with some rules that basically allowed me to recreate the battles using Chinese. I actually have Vietnamese too for early on, and then Korean and Japanese ships. So it's a very simple D6 system.
I was gonna say, is that the entire rule set?
That's it.
Wow, that's impressive.
Well, obviously, there's some other explanations of things, and I might eventually publish it. But yeah, I think of this as an invention game, so it's really simple.
But that gets you going right there.
That gets you going. Yep.
I can't argue with that. That's terrific.
And the counters if you need, or just the kind of damage that you do are fires. So there's a fire marker, and if you put a hole in the ship, there's a hole. And if you exceed the number of your hull points, you either sink from holes or you burn up from fires. Yep.
Oh, very good.
And then it's got turn markers and like I said, D6 system.
Very good. So, how about a quick tour around and
Okay.
show us what we're looking at? What are all these
All right. Well,
fancy boats and
we're still
such?
setting up. I'll start over here. This is the Japanese, and these are some of the early Japanese boats that were considered often used by pirates. And then this is just a Japanese fort. The fort itself is actually by a Shiro, a company in England, sort of castle. And the Japanese basically built forts on southern Korea as part of their invasion, part of their occupation from 1592 to 1598. Then the more standard type ships we have for the Japanese. This is a kabaya, which is almost like a canoe, and they would have a few matchlock men, and then some warriors, spearmen, or whatever. Then they would have the rowers. And along the sides, they would put up these screens, basically to block spent arrows. So it would give them some kind of little bit
Give them
of
a little bit
protection.
of cover.
Right, and then the oars would come out the sides. The sekibune, which is kind of like their destroyers or fast, they call them fast ships, were small, a little bit smaller, but the oarsmen were generally down below, and they use a system where they actually kind of a screw type oar as opposed to what we traditionally think of for rowing. And then their main battleship was called the Takabune, and it was built kind of like a castle, a floating castle. And then they had some other ones that were much bigger. And the granddaddy was...
I was going to say, is this the flagship of the fleet?
Yep, this is the Nihon Maru, which was the largest ship that the Japanese had. and it was actually in a battle with the turtle ship once. It got poled, rammed, and holed, but they had good carpenters there. They were able to repair it, so it did not sink.
Wow.
Now the Japanese used a little bit of cannons, mostly captured from the Koreans, but primarily they were interested in getting in close combat hand to hand. So a lot of the Japanese ships and their tactics is to go in, grapple, board, whereas the Koreans were more interested in standing off with cannons.
So really they wanted to load this up with as many dudes as they could, get to your boat, and then get off theirs and get on yours and fight it out.
Correct.
Very good.
Yep. Now if we
see, I'm not real smart, but I can figure that part out.
Now, if we go over to the other side here.
These are some beautiful models, by the way.
Thank you. We'll see some of the other ships. Now in this particular battle of Noryang Strait, there was actually a Korean fleet and then there was a Ming Chinese fleet. And the Ming Chinese primarily had more junks and transport craft. They didn't have as good well-built ships as the Koreans did. So sometimes they actually borrowed some of the Korean warships. But the junks represent the Chinese ships. And then this is the Korean battleship, which is called a Panuksan. And they had some cannons. Also, again, similarly built in the sense of the Takabune in terms of the height.
Sure.
And then, of course, they had them in various sizes. They were strengthened. They had a flat bottom, so they were much more easier to turn and more maneuverable in the inland seas of Korea, the coastline.
Yeah, and when you're rowing, that makes a big difference.
Right, and the Japanese ships had a V-shaped hull. They tended to be faster going straight, but they couldn't turn as well. Sure. And that caused some, in terms of some of the tactics that were involved. This represents Admiral Yi's flagship, and so you see it's quite a bit bigger than the normal Panuksan. And the other thing they had were these, I forget the name of it now, but it's this multiple arrow launcher, or so to speak.
Right.
Like
yeah.
rocket launcher. Yeah.
That's like your 1500s machine gun there.
Yes. Yep. So they use some of those, and then of course, so we have for the sake of the battle, I've mixed up the Panuksans and the junks because the junks will sink pretty easily. The Panuksans will stand up to a lot more punishment.
And it looks like these guys have a little more heavy armament on them. I see some cannons.
So it represents, again, they tended to use more cannons. A lot of influence from the Ming Chinese that were Roger. So they primarily relied on firepower and also more powerful ships, but they didn't have any problems going in, getting in close. And of course,
real quick, what scale?
These are roughly 12 millimeter. Callistra's 12 millimeter figures, and the ships aren't, perfect to scale, but it's again representative. So, and then of course the sweet one is the turtle ship.
Yeah.
The Koreans, over a period of 100 years, built turtle ships at various times. Admiral Yi was not the first one to do it, but he helped build on it. There's a lot of discussion about the actual design of the ship. This particular one, you've got the head up front. This is kind of the more traditional one, but there's a lot of examples, or at least more recently, that the Dragon's head was down below because they talked about smoke coming out of it or cannons firing out of the mouth. So, but there's no actual drawings or anything that have survived. So a lot of this is speculative. They have descriptions of encounters with them, but not of the actual ship itself. But they were particularly powerful because they were strengthened. They, with the bow, they would ram into the other ship. And then they have cannons all around there, smash through fire cannons, and then to avoid enemy soldiers jumping on the top, they had some spikes, kind of a deterrent if you want to jump down. And also there's discussion whether it had some kind of armor or really tough hide on the top to keep the enemy from being able to shoot down.
I can imagine that's a really tough one.
Oh, he's already in that one. gotta come here. I gotta go there.
Just looking at it, not knowing the mechanics, not knowing the history, I'm pretty sure that I drive that into wherever you're at, and I just start blasting away with all those cannons.
That's it. You just go through and punch through. It has in the several battles that we've played with it, it's been slightly damaged, but never anything to stop it.
Yeah, I can imagine maybe you could burn it, but yeah, beyond that, that looks like one tough customer.
The best tactic for the Japanese is to get their small, maybe a kawai or whatever, and go over there and tie it up so that it keeps it from maneuvering.
So that way it can't get to the rest of the fleet.
Correct. You just kind of distract it with your little stuff. It's a sacrificial,
those guys aren't coming back.
And that way you can swarm and attack the more weaker ships and try to destroy as many of those as you can.
Sure. So how does one win the game? What are the victory conditions? Do you have to totally defeat the enemy?
This is basically kind of defeat the enemy. I've got a philosophy that I've kind of used, at least for this game, because at the time they were really pretty.
But this is first. This is first. He fell back.
It's fanatical in terms of the fighting, especially the samurai. So I kind of leave it up to the players' morale, individual morale.
Their actual morale.
So if the players' morale breaks, then you can pretty much tell that side's broken.
All right, I've had enough.
But
I give up.
But other than that, it's pretty much just go at it and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I imagine this.
Beer and pretzel type rule set.
Sure, I thought this is quite the slugfest when you finally get the close.
It is, and it closes pretty quickly.
Well, like I said, it may have been.
There are two ranges that I use. The cannons fire 36 inches, and everything else fires 18 inches. So, he's in range for the cannon.
I was going to say, so the cannon fire starts immediately.
Exactly, and that means that, and of course, the Koreans and the Chinese probably have anywhere from 3 or 4 to 1 cannons versus the Japanese. So they start punching holes in them. Or starting fires, and then they start to close. So.
Yeah, the shooting starts on turn 1, though, huh?
It does. So it's fast and gets in there fast and furious.
Yeah, you might have to maneuver to win, but you're not going to have to maneuver too much to start, I don't think. And then you got a little bit of cover.
There's some islands
as well as impassable terrain. You got to work around it. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your game with me, Conrad. Just, like I said, it's not my forte, and I really like the model. The team sounds like it's a lot of fun.
Well, it was something new for me, and whenever I get into a game, I really enjoy the research, the modeling, putting things together. A lot of the figures out here are still only partially painted. And that's because I'm more interested in getting everything out.
Sure.
But it's a work in progress, so I keep working on it. That's it. And then I got to go on to other projects.
All right, well, Conrad, thank you so much for your time today. And for the SitRep podcast, this is Marty signing off, and we will see you at the next one.